And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PSBTA Technical Solutions webinar series. My name is Martha Ellis, and I am the Executive Director for the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association, or the PSBTA. As an association, our primary objective is to work as an end-user advocate for first responders and service providers. We've created this webinar series in an effort to bring you the most current and accurate information on all aspects of broadband use for public safety personnel. Today's webinar is the second in a series designed to inform all first responders on current developments with the management and use of the 4.9 gigahertz broadband spectrum, which is currently designated solely for public safety use. If you missed our earlier webinar, Preserving the 4.9 gigahertz spectrum for public safety, on August 12th, please visit our webpage at thepsbta.org to watch the archive program. Before we get started today, I have a few housekeeping items. All attendees have automatically been muted to reduce background noise. Any questions should be submitted directly to us through the questions function, which is located at the bottom of the menu on the right side of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of our presentations, and we will attempt to answer as many as possible, yet stay within our allotted hour. We will follow up with any questions that don't get answered after we finish up today. An email address will also be provided so you can send us additional questions after we conclude. Finally, in the panel to the right of your screen, I would also like to point out that there is a handout available that should be downloaded prior to the conclusion of the webinar. Today's public safety professionals have a lot on their minds and plenty to prepare for. Worrying about their expanding needs for broadband access should not be a point of concern. We are fortunate to have 3 former members of the inaugural FirstNet Authority Board with us today. These folks were in the trenches fighting for the broadband interests of all first responders during the inception of FirstNet, our nation's only fully designated public safety broadband network. As members of the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance, they are here to discuss the strengths and successes of the FirstNet Authority, which is responsible for all aspects of oversight of the FirstNet network, and how that relates to the preservation and use of the 4.9 spectrum for first responders. I'd like to welcome Chief Jeff Johnson, Chief Chuck Dowd, and Sue Swenson, who served as the chairwoman for the FirstNet Authority Board. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. And now I would just like to turn the time over to Chief Johnson to get us started with our webinar, a look inside the governance of the First Responders Network Authority, why the FirstNet Authority is built to protect 4.9 gigahertz.
Well, thank you, Martha. And it's so good to have all of you with us today. I think maybe a good place to start off is what is the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance and why are we working so hard to preserve the 4.9 spectrum for public safety? Well, it's rather simple. The PSSA is a group of public safety professionals that have a history in spectrum and in public safety broadband. Most of us had some role in either the legislative lift or the FirstNet Board of Directors and getting this spectrum to the competitive marketplace, so that eventually we ended up with a public safety broadband network, which currently today has 1.5 million users. The PSSA is an offshoot of the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association. They exist to support the users of FirstNet and to support FirstNet and our public safety broadband network. The group of us actually is quite eclectic. If you think about it, we have leadership from a history with FirstNet. We have public safety background. We have the people that assisted with the legislative lift. We have a commercial and technology expertise represented. But the one thing we share in common is we know what public safety is going to need and what they currently need for our broadband communication needs. And we have some perspective about why spectrum is so important and why it's important that public safety preserve it. We got together really with 3 goals in mind, I think, as it relates to the 4.9 spectrum. The first is to preserve the 4.9 spectrum for public safety. And when I say preserve, I mean preserve. This is public safety's 50 megahertz of spectrum. It was licensed to public safety in 2002. And our goal is to preserve it. The second goal we have is to assign this 4.9 spectrum to the FirstNet Authority. Now, you noticed I didn't say FirstNet. I said FirstNet Authority. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time today talking about why FirstNet and the FirstNet Authority are different and why that's a nuance that matters. And buried within that allocation to FirstNet would be a requirement to develop a plan on how to use that for public safety's behalf. And lastly, to protect the existing users within the 4.9 spectrum. Now, there are over 3,500 licensees currently using 4.9. We don't know how many users that is, and that's because the licenses are assigned by region, which means you could give the entire Chicago area a single license, for example, and have no idea how many people within that region are using it. But we do know there's upwards of 3,500 licensees, and our goal, one of our 3 goals, is to protect those licensees. And so that brings up the question, why now? Why didn't we raise this issue last year or 3 years ago? And the reason is that there's been ongoing proceedings at the FCC on what to do with the spectrum. And those are known as further notice of proposed rulemaking. We're currently in the 6th further notice of proposed rulemaking. So we believe this was an ongoing conversation. It was only recently when FCC officials started talking about other uses for the public safety spectrum. Once you start talking about other uses or other people migrating in and using that alongside public safety, now you have our attention. We believe public safety has unique needs. We believe they have needs that are defined by the future, not the past, in terms of what spectrum we need. And frankly, we have the Public Safety Broadband Network in FirstNet that is now deployed with over 1.5 million users. And we now have proven that the model works. So now let's start watching out for the future of public safety, since we've got today very well in hand. I think in the mind of the FCC, if I were to represent their position for a minute, I think they see 4.9 is underutilized, and they're rightfully looking for maximum utilization of spectrum. And if you're not familiar with spectrum, it's essentially lanes through the sky by which data travels, and the federal government controls that spectrum. It is typically auctioned off or licensed. In this particular case, it's licensed to public safety. And I think it's right that the FCC would want to see that efficiently used. But again, you got to go back to the basic points, and those basic points are, we have been busy deploying FirstNet, which is the LTE broadband network for public safety. And frankly, we are just now on the cusp of 5G, 5th generation technology, which frankly is a good use for 4.9 spectrum. So when you look at that, you say all spectrum has its time and place, and it's now time. And that's kind of why public safety is now saying we want to make sure that we maintain this spectrum. So maybe at this time, it'd be a good time to talk about what public safety has done in the past to create FirstNet, what we did to preserve the spectrum at that time, and if there was ever an expert on why public safety did what we did legislatively in creating FirstNet, that would be Chief Chuck Dowd. Now, Chief Dowd was one of the principals in the leading the effort for D-Block. Chief Dowd, as was mentioned, is one of the inaugural board members as a result of his effort, and he served proudly the city of New York as a second-generation police officer and served that city for many decades, and is known as a leading technologist in wireless communication across the nation. So, Chuck, it's my honor to turn this over to you, Chief Dowd.
Jeff, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Yeah, as I said, I'm Chuck Dowd. I'm a retired assistant chief with the NYPD. I spent roughly the last 12 years of my career in the NYPD doing all things communications, running the New York 911 system, running the police radio operations, coordinating with the fire and department and their EMS component for seamless transition of information back and forth We worked very hard and long in consolidating that capability. And I think it was a great success. Jeff talks about the history of how FirstNet came into existence. And I apologize if some of you heard our presentation, Sue and my presentation on WCE this morning. There'll be a little bit, it's a little bit redundant, but it's important for those that didn't hear it to understand the history of this. If you would ask the NYPD or the FDNY on September 10th, 2001, did we need outside help? Did we need a communications capability to talk to public safety entities from around the region, around the country? We would have politely smiled at you and said, no, we're okay, we're fine. Well, on September 12th, 2001, we realized that that wasn't true. And so the process started really nationwide to look at the concerns over radio interoperability, communications interoperability. But that also morphed into something else at that point. It morphed into not only do we need to be able to talk to each other, but we need to be able to share information. We need to be able to share data. So we started looking around the country and found out that there were a lot of entities around the country that were thinking exactly the same way. So we began an effort to secure radio spectrum, the 700 spectrum, many of you know it as the D block, to secure that spectrum so that we could build a nationwide public safety communications network, and not in a one-off technology, but in exactly the same technology that the commercial entities use. And today that is LTE. That made sense to us. We knew we needed, we were a special case in the sense that we needed certain prioritizations and coverage requirements and survivability requirements. But essentially, the technology was exactly the same, and we knew we wanted to do that. So as we progressed through that, in that effort, and as Jeff said earlier, it was a hard-fought battle to get that spectrum assigned to us. It took years, and finally we were able to convince the then Obama administration and then Congress that this made sense for us, and the legislation was passed. Now, why is that important for 4.9? You say, well, you have FirstNet, you have the FirstNet Authority. Why is that important? Here's my perspective on that. 4.9, like all spectrum governed by the FCC, is assigned by licensing, which means they are regulations. They are not laws. One of the things that's unique about FirstNet Authority and the FirstNet spectrum is that it is assigned by federal law, signed by the president. That spectrum is public safety spectrum. The only way it can be taken away is by legislation, federal legislation, which then would have to be signed by whatever president is sitting in the Oval Office. That is highly unlikely. So when you talk about the history of FirstNet and you talk about its value to public safety, one of the things that's unique about it is it can't go away. It is by law, it was created by law. So while it sits inside of the US Commerce Department, the Secretary of Commerce, whoever that might be in the future, can't just suddenly turn around one day and say, you know what, I don't think we really need this FirstNet thing anymore. I think we're just going to do away with it. They can't do it. It is federally mandated by law. So the FirstNet Authority is mandated by law. The radio spectrum is mandated to be assigned for public safety use by law. You cannot take those two things away. And another distinction, and I don't recall if Jeff mentioned this, that spectrum is not licensed to the contractor AT&T. That spectrum is licensed to the FirstNet Authority. They are the keeper of the spectrum. They are responsible for caretaking of that spectrum for public safety. Why is that relevant to 4.9? Well, it's relevant to 4.9 for the simple reason that since it is a federally mandated entity created specifically to serve public safety, it makes sense that if you wanted to protect the 4.9 spectrum, that a great place to protect it would be inside FirstNet. The history of this is that public safety supported this as entities through the Public Safety Alliance over many years, from 2009 to 2012 when the legislation was passed. And we did something unique in that effort. For the first time in history, every major public safety organization and agency supported the effort to secure that spectrum. The spectrum itself is public safety, as Jeff mentioned. We do not want to be in a position like September 11th where we don't know what we need, all right? So while the discussion had gone on inside the FCC what to do with that 4.9 spectrum, post 9/11, they very quickly assigned it to public safety. Public safety's history is littered with examples of there being an emergency, a crisis, a hurricane, Katrina, Sandy, a terrorist attack, an earthquake, a blackout, where we're reactive to the problem and solve that afterwards. What FirstNet was an attempt to be proactive. So by considering the possibility of assigning 4.9 to the spectrum, to the FirstNet Authority, we are looking to be proactive to secure and protect what is rightfully public safety's, which is that 50 megahertz of spectrum. 4.9 is not greenfield spectrum, so there are issues already. So today, the NYPD uses it in a major way to transmit video. I know the LAPD does something very similar. This spectrum is important to us, and we may not know everything we needed for today, just like on September 10th, 2001, we really didn't know what we needed, but the time will come when we will know that. And the last position you want to be in is returning that spectrum to the FCC, only to find out after the next major crisis that we really needed it. So again, I think when you look at the history of FirstNet, when you look at what FirstNet Authority's responsibilities are, it makes logical sense that that would be a great place to secure and protect that spectrum for public safety. One of the other things I haven't mentioned yet that is also mandated by the law is the PSAC, the Public Safety Advisory Committee, which is inside of FirstNet. If you're not familiar with the Public Safety Advisory Committee, it is a group of about 30 public safety organizations from around the country that is chaired by a first responder. In this instance, it's chaired by Todd Early, who works in public safety communications in Texas and does a great job, by the way. And so if that is an entity that exists to advise both the FirstNet Authority organization and the FirstNet Authority board on what public safety's needs are. How this would be structured is yet to be decided. But it seems to me, and it occurs to me, and I think a lot of people would agree, that if you were looking for a place where you have an existing public safety entity that's established and cannot be taken away, it exists through federal law, that would be an ideal place to do this. Now, how would that look? I don't know. But certainly that seems like a logical place to put that spectrum, and then public safety can make the decision on how that spectrum should be utilized, where, how, and when. And I think that's the value of that. Listen, Jeff said we have to protect that spectrum. It's ours. So we need to, let's stay proactive on it. Let's stay ahead of it. And let's protect 4.9. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Sue Swenson, our former chair of FirstNet. And when Jeff and I first met her at our first meeting in August of 2012, we looked around the room at the board, potential board members that were in there, because we hadn't been sworn in yet. And we could tell by Sue's reaction, she was excited to be working with public safety. And so Sue, I hand it off to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chief. I really appreciate the perspective that you and Chief Johnson have provided, and delighted to be on this webinar with you today. You know, having served on the inaugural FirstNet board during its inception and through, gosh, it was like a startup, standing up the organization. We had a consultation process that took 2 years. We did market research, the RFP, the award, and the ultimate launch of the nationwide public safety broadband network. I really feel like we're in a position, particularly to talk about why we believe that 4.9 being assigned to the FirstNet Authority makes sense. And I'm going to go through a couple of things that the audience may not have had visibility to as to why we have come to this conclusion. You know, the first thing is that the authority is independent. It's written in the legislation that it's an independent authority, and I mean really independent. And I'll talk about some of the conditions that cause that to be very true. It has a very disciplined process that it's gone through in terms of the NPS, the Nationwide Public Safety Broadband Network, went through a very disciplined process to actually cause that to happen. And those of you listening probably remember that I think even though the legislation was passed, I still think that there were a lot of people that thought it would never happen. So I think it's a nice roadmap for what may be able to happen with 4.9. As Chuck said, we don't know the answers today. We just think it's a good place to place it, protect it, and figure out what makes sense for public safety from a future perspective. As Martha mentioned, I joined Chief Dowd and Chief Johnson in the inaugural board in 2012. And but you may not be aware of how the board gets established. I mean, it's just not a matter of going and picking your friends like a lot of organizations do and you put them on the board. There's a very disciplined process, and it's in the legislation. It's the law. So there are 15 board members. 3 are permanent. One is the Secretary of Homeland Security. The second permanent position is the Attorney General of the United States. And the third is the Director of Office of Management and Budget. As you might expect, those folks are pretty busy. And so the board has designees from those organizations, but those are never changing. Those positions will be permanent. Beyond that, there are 12 additional board members that get selected. And it's really important to understand how the representation occurs, because again, it's not a matter of, you know, the chair saying, okay, let's bring our friends on here. There are areas that have to be identified and populated to make sure that there's a diversity of skill and representation. I think the people who crafted this were very insightful in terms of how this should be structured. Although I'll comment that there was a little bit of storming, norming, and forming of the board when it first got together, because obviously when you're bringing together people who had never worked together before in terms of public safety and the industry. But there has to be technical expertise in broadband and public safety communications. There has to be at least one person on the board that has that. There has to be expertise in building, deploying, and operating commercial networks. Again, at least one and more if needed. And then there's an area of expertise in financing and funding telecom networks. So you can see that they really thought through, not only is it important to have the 3 not less than 3 public safety people on the board, but then there's got to be another skill set that actually complements the public safety group. On top of that, there also needs to be geographic diversity. You know, I think there's a tendency when you have things happening in Washington, D.C. to lean towards the East Coast. We think it's important that the country be represented from both a geographic and regional basis. And there also has to be a balance of rural and urban. So, so you can see that it's not an easy process. It's a very intense process. You know, the NTIA goes out with a solicitation every year and asks for people to submit. And there are a ton of talented people who express interest in being part of this. But I think you can see that, and even with an abundance of talent, we have to make sure that those particular positions get filled. So I'm not sure how many people know how challenging it is to populate this board with the right people. Additionally, while you're on the board, when you talk about independence, obviously the authority is independent. The board has to be independent and not have any ties to any particular company that may be in conflict. So prior to going on the board, there's a fairly rigorous process of reviewing any economic ties that a board member would potentially have to a company. And that also continues through the tenure of a board member. So board members may be disqualified as a result of their ties or their occupation. And during their tenure, they may get involved in a company and they'll have to make a decision. Do they want to stay on the board and not be part of that, or divest that economic tie and stay on the board? So a very rigorous process. I know that there's a lot in the news about that. I can assure you that the Department of Commerce and their ethics people are relentless about making sure that that happens. So I want to make sure that everybody knows there is a lot of independence there, regardless of anybody's previous affiliation or association. Chuck mentioned it, but I think a unique characteristic of the authority is the PSAC. The PSAC is written into the law, and so it's not optional. It was actually first formed in February 2013, and first chaired by Harlan McEwen, who I think a lot of you probably are aware, and he did a terrific job in this new organization, forming it, getting the right people on there, and starting the very important work that the PSAC continues to this day. I'll mention that the PSAC reports directly to the board, not to management. So it's structured in that way to make sure that public safety can have direct access to the board with no filtering. I think that's an important aspect that, again, this spectrum, this network is public safety's network. So these people are really critical in terms of making sure that, one, all of public safety's views are represented and that the board and management have that visibility. This is an ongoing, very active organization. As Chuck said, Todd Early chairs that today. Todd's been involved in, the whole FirstNet effort right from the very beginning, and so it's great to see him in that chair position. They provide very candid feedback about particular policies, procedures that the FirstNet Authority may be introducing, get feedback about product performance, about product ideas. You name it, they're involved in it, and they're very, very active. And I believe that as I was leaving, and when Jeff and I were leaving the board in 2018, I think that we had some discussions, and I think Todd has implemented today some more targeted efforts inside of the PSAC for particular issues. I think there are strike teams, and those are rotational, and those ideas get fed back into the organization. So the PSAC is a unique structure, and again, it's public safety's network, and they are really key. This is not perfunctory, and this is not routine. They are a critical part of this. I think from an organizational standpoint, something that you probably never see is the FirstNet Authority organization and the skill, expertise, independence that they bring to the process. And so I just want to talk about that a little bit. At the very beginning of FirstNet, at the authority, as part of the legislation, we had to go out and do consultation with all states, territories, and commonwealths to get feedback to put into the request for proposal. That was a very important process, and that really drove the detail around the RFP. Once again, driven primarily by public safety. Public safety drove that. FirstNet Authority facilitated it. So they are there to make that happen. I also think it's important to understand and remember that the authority used a very unique approach from a procurement standpoint. Those of you who've dealt with the government knows that a lot of the RFPs are driven by requirements, very specific requirements that have to be met. Well, this particular challenge, developing a nationwide public safety broadband network had never been done before. And the authority took the approach and said, look, we don't have all the answers here. Let's identify the objectives that we want to have accomplished and let industry come back with proposed solutions, partnering with whoever they need to partner with. And I think that was an excellent move on the part of the authority to take this approach. And I would tell you, unique in the government. The objectives, are very prescriptive, very detailed, and at the end, help the authority make a determination on who the contract should be awarded to. The authority follows all federal rules and regulations, and I will tell you, initially, I think the kind of government people who came from the private sector, I think we kind of chafed at that, to be honest, to saying, why do we have to follow these rules? But I think in the end, it does provide the transparency and the clarity of the processes for those who are involved in it. So I think following the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Rules, was actually the right approach to take. And while we were confident in what we were doing, as is typical probably in procurements like this, it was protested, but again, our approach was validated by the Federal District Court about our award decision. So that was very reinforcing that what the authority did was very proper, and there were no questions about any of the things that they took, the actions that were taken. The FirstNet Authority, I think some of you may know, but maybe not know, that a lot of people who work at the authority are from public safety. So they bring that public safety perspective and mindset to the organization on a day-to-day basis. And so, they're constantly engaging with public safety. And in fact, there's an organization inside of the authority that is the Public Safety Advocacy Group. So in addition to having employees inside of FirstNet who are public safety personnel, this organization is physically and geographically dispersed so that they can interact with public safety on an ongoing basis and always have a sense of what's going on and bring that ground truth back to the organization. Very importantly, as part of the organization, there's a technical organization located in Boulder, Colorado, headed up by Jeff Bratcher. And Jeff has been part of FirstNet for quite some time, has a technical background, obviously, and has a very close relationship with the folks at PSCR, who are also in Boulder. So this is a group that ensures that the public safety needs are represented. They're part of the global standards group, which I think a lot of people don't realize that is a job that I would never want to have. And I thank the people who choose to do that every day. It's obviously very important for the future of public safety to make sure that public safety requirements are actually incorporated in global standards around wireless communication. So very important work. They stay current on technology trends. Again, work directly with the PSCR to look at future needs, and then always making sure that the network and the solutions that are in the hands of public safety are performing as designed and per the contract. So a very important function, both from an execution standpoint today, but also looking into the future. Obviously, because of this very important contract, the FirstNet Authority has a group that manages all aspects of the contract, which is very important to make sure that public safety gets what they were promised, and a very important part of that. And lastly, the balance of the organization, which is finance and IT and public relations, PR, that sort of thing. They are all aligned around the mission of the FirstNet Authority. So importantly to say that there are no conflicting agendas in the authority. It's not an organization that has multiple priorities and they have to pick and choose. The authority exists to support and advocate for public safety. So in my mind, the only, quote, shareholder that the authority has is public safety. And so there's no ambiguity or prioritization issues that occur on a daily basis. So I just want to give you a look behind the curtain a little bit to give you a view that you may not have had visibility to. And I think it's important to understand how it operates with discipline, with integrity, with transparency, and have the organization has the skill and the ability, having been through the process before, to potentially then sort through this spectrum needs for public safety going forward and be in a position to help make recommendations. Now, Chuck will tell you, and I'll tell you, and Jeff will tell you that this is just our idea, but we are certainly open to ideas. If you have a better idea or another idea, we are certainly open to hearing what you have to say. but hopefully this has given you a sense of why we believe the FirstNet Authority is the right place to assign the 4.9 spectrum going forward. So with that, I'll turn the webinar back to Martha, who can handle any questions from the audience, and close the webinar. Martha.
Great, thank you all so much. Those are invaluable insights. What a treat to have all three of you here from that inaugural board. Truly a treat for the viewers for sure to be able to see what was actually going on at those very moments and all the hard work. It's so important for first responders to understand the incredible work that's been done on their behalf. And equally as important, of course, is that they understand the value of the FirstNet Authority and the work that they continue to do for them based on those statutory requirements. So Sue, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to you first, because you did mention that you came from the private sector. So if you would, can you give us a super snippet of your background and how you became part of this effort?
Well, sure, I can talk about it, but it'll cause people to feel like I couldn't keep a job. You know, started in wireline telecom and moved over to wireless in an organization called Pacific Telesis, which no longer exists. But I had great experience there in terms of both wireline and wireless experience. How I got involved was really interesting. Our first chairman, Sam Ginn, I hadn't spoken to him in years, and called me up one day and said, I'm getting involved in this really interesting project. You know, maybe you'd be interested. You know, but he said, but, you know, I can't give it, you know, the detail that you might want. So you should probably talk to Larry Strickling, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce, who's at NTIA. So I did. And I said, you know, I'm one to say nothing ventured, nothing gained. It sounds really interesting. I knew nothing about it and got involved in it. And I have to tell you, Martha, it's probably one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. It's nice to take that years of experience of working in wireless. And also I worked at T-Mobile for a while, and I, you know, ran a joint venture for AT&T and AirTouch, and you know, I did some software. And so it's just nice to take those years of experience and apply it to something that is so important for our country. So thanks to Sam Ginn, I got involved in FirstNet.
Great. And just for a moment, Chief Johnson, I'm going to ask you a very quick question while our attendee numbers are still up. Can you share with the audience how they can get involved in this effort and participate?
Well, first, we have an exciting announcement coming out very shortly about how people can get active with us. We want to apologize for people. We've had a bit of a wave of people saying, how do I help? And it just takes a little bit of time to get back in touch with them. But essentially, we will have a process that we're announcing later this week, I believe, where we'll be able to put you in a role where you can help us achieve the goal.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Sue, I'm sorry, I'm going to bounce back to you really quick. When we're talking about the 4.9 gigahertz, with all of the insights that you have with the FirstNet Network Authority, how do you envision the process to play out to determine the most optimum use of that spectrum for public safety?
You know, I think as Chuck said, we're not really sure exactly what the process would look like, but I think the work that the authority did for the legislation can serve as a platform and a foundation to consider. Very exhaustive work with public safety. Again, understanding public safety's needs, working with PSCR, and actually going through that consultative process that I think was really critical to the success of the outcome, you know, of the FirstNet Authority. So again, I don't think we're not prescriptive at this point. We're really open to people's ideas and thoughts, but I can see it being very collaborative, again, with public safety. Again, people need to remember, the authority only exists to serve public safety. I mean, public safety is the focus here. And so public safety is going to have to get involved like they did with the legislation and help shape what that outcome is. So I think it's going to be up to public safety to determine that.
Hey, Martha, I just want to touch on that. I just want to touch on that question a little bit too. Don't forget, you know, 4.9 is not green space spectrum like the FirstNet spectrum was. There are already users on that. Public safety, if you know, so has to protect that spectrum first of all, but we also have to be very sensitive to the existing users and to make sure that they are confident that what they have already built and what they are using on a daily basis is going to be protected. That's a very important part of this.
That's right, Chuck.
So yeah, Chuck, since you brought that up, you had mentioned in your presentation a couple of uses that you were aware of, but can you expand a little bit on how 4.9 can be leveraged as a meaningful tool within public safety?
So, I mean, there's a whole host of ways, and when you look at the way public safety is utilizing their tools, whether it's cameras, whether it's backhaul, whether it's devices, traffic control. I mean, there's a host of ways that this can be used. The question will be, what does that look like? What does public safety want to use it for? I mentioned earlier the NYPD is using it very extensively for their security camera network. But again, there are so many different ways that it can be used. And what we have learned, and like we learned on September 11th, we learned what we didn't know, right? And so you move forward from there. But the point is, secure the spectrum, be proactive in securing it and keeping it for public safety, because when there is a tool, public safety will find that way to use it. The question for them now is that spectrum certainty. If there's nervousness in both the public and the private sector, in the public safety sector and the private sector, on what's going to happen to that spectrum, many folks are reluctant to use it, or the corporate side is reluctant to make the investment in it. And so we have to make sure that happens. Public safety, listen, they're 100% behind not giving up that spectrum. The question is more about where it belongs and how to secure it for public safety.
Martha, one comment.
Yes.
I think as you think we're on the cusp or right into 5G, and I think, where that spectrum sits and, the authorities' recent decisions around 5G investment, I'm sure will play a part in what public safety does with that. Again, TBD, based on what they have to say about that. But I think that's important.
Yeah, and the point that you've all made clearly is that we don't have a crystal ball. So to be able to predict what all those use models are going to look like is not really fair, considering what we were thinking about 10 years ago and where we are today, 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's hard to predict what that usage is going to be, but it's a pretty safe bet that it's going to be robust, and that we don't want to give up an inch of the spectrum before we have an opportunity to exercise that. So one of the questions that came in, and it's kind of, I don't know exactly who will want to answer this, but the question is, will Wi-Fi 6 technologies work on the 4.9 gigahertz spectrum? Is there somebody who can answer that?
Yes, there is. But they don't happen to be on this call.
Okay. Okay, well then thankfully we will be able to seek out those answers and get them to the individual who sent them in for us as soon as we're off of this. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back a little bit to the authority, and let's just assume that we are able to successfully get this into the stewardship of the authority on behalf of public safety. Sue, I'm going to ask you, does the authority have any biases in determining the best outcomes because of previously awarded contracts to AT&T?
No, I think that's one of the points, and thanks for asking, because I think that's one of the points I wanted to make, is that the first and foremost consideration is public safety. Whatever the outcome is going to be a result of the process, and it's not going to be biased towards any particular vendor, carrier, whatever. There's a lot of questions. And if you think back to the legislation, people did have some preconceived notions at that point. And I think Jeff and Chuck would agree to that. There were some notions about how it should be done, and it was a result of frankly, the consultative process over a couple of years that actually caused people to rethink what they had initially thought. So even if there are inclinations of people to think, well, here's the solution, I think we're probably going to be, not surprised, but I would hope open to a different outcome. So there's no preconceived notion. Again, the primary focus is public safety. We start with public safety. Everything else comes in to support it. However that solution comes together to support it will be the solution. But there's no predetermination at this particular point in time.
Yeah, Martha, one of the things you need is, and we've already mentioned this, is you need spectrum certainty. Once you have that certainty, the rest will happen. It'll take time, but it will happen.
Yeah, based on the process that we all became familiar with the federal acquisition rules, even if we wanted to give this spectrum to somebody, you can't take a government asset that's this valuable and just hand it to a corporate entity because we like their logo or something. I mean, you can't do that. That's why the FAR exists, and that's why the competitive process that FirstNet went through was so exhausting. And need I remind anyone that not only was the FAR, the process that FirstNet used, fair and objective, but it withstood court challenges. And in fact, one of the losing bidders actually said, public safety is in good hands because this is the fairest process I've ever been through. And that was a losing bidder. So you want to know why we put our confidence in FirstNet? Because we've seen the process that they use. We have a proven track record of being here for and exclusively for public safety. We saw it work. We've proved that it works. We've proved that FirstNet authority, the way the board is constructed, the way it has independence, the way it's taken previously awarded federal assets and created competition to build a network that so quickly has 1.5 million users. You want to know why we have confidence? Because it worked, and because it was fair, and it withstood the test of a court challenge. It withstood all the critics that said it would never happen. We trust them because we've seen the process from the inside.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to that point, clearly the influence of public safety from beginning to end, present company included, is why it's been such a success, right? Somebody wasn't doing this for public safety. Public safety was doing it for public safety. So clearly all of those influences were a huge contributing factor to the success, the inclusion of so many perspectives of the first responders, current and past. So again, hats off to all of you for the work that you did. So I want to talk a little bit about, and Sue had mentioned the integrity and all of the efforts that are made to keep anybody from having a conflict of interest. These boards are extremely important, both the PSAC and the FirstNet board. And Chuck, I'm going to direct this question to you. Looking at the current board members on the actual FirstNet board, can you speak a little bit about your professional opinion about where the board sits right now and the confidence level you have?
So my concern is, first of all, I think it's doing an effective job, but I think it could be a little bit more effective. What I'd like to see on that board is greater state and local public safety representation. While we have very competent guys on there, folks on there, I think it's a little bit, I want to be careful about how I characterize this. I think it's a little bit federally top heavy. And I'd like to see more state and local, because don't forget, as you just mentioned, this effort was a state and local grassroots grounds up effort to get that spectrum secured for first responder. All first response is local. So I think, look, initially you needed a lot of corporate help on that board, simply because we in public safety had no experience in doing anything like this, right? Now that a contract is established, there's a company obligated to perform for public safety in this, and if they don't, they could potentially lose the spectrum. That's part of the deal, right? We all know that. We don't want to see that happen. We want to see this be successful, and so far I believe to a large degree it has. But now that we're past that point with the makeup of the board, I'd be interested to see more state and local representation. And when I say state and local we need active police, fire, and EMS entities on the board. I think that is the direction that Commerce should go when it comes to appointments.
And
can you?
There will be an opportunity to relook at that. I mean, with some terms. The board has a term of, I think, 3 years that can be re-upped. So you are term limited. And so there will be an opportunity in I think the not too distant future, if I remember some of the expiration dates, to take a look at that. So so that would be something to certainly look at, Chuck, in the rotation coming up.
Great. And if you could, would you contrast that perspective with the effectiveness of the PSAC and how those two boards interact with each other?
Is that directed to me or?
It is, Chuck. I'm sorry. It is directed to you. Sorry.
Yes. So, so again, the voice of public safety from a, on the ground, what do we need? What's new? What does public safety want to see? What do they want to use? What applications? What capabilities? That funnels through the PSAC, and it was designed to do that. I don't like the characterization that the PSAC reports to the board. I like to use the term that the PSAC advises the board, because they are independent in the sense that they make decisions not in a corporate way, but in a public safety methodology, so that interaction needs to be, I think, needs to be pushed. I think the PSAC should have a greater prominence in decision making within FirstNet. And I think one of the ways that can be accomplished is what I already said, which is, and this is no reflection on any one individual that's a board member, but I just think it would be helpful to have greater public safety representation in order to accomplish that relationship better.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I just had this question come in, and I think it's salient based on some of the activity of the PSSA of late. FirstNet has not submitted comment to the SEC regarding the 4.9 gigahertz proceeding. Is there any reason why they would not be offering their view? Many years ago, the DHS SOR made reference to so-called incident area networks where 4.9 gigahertz seemed designed for. So Chief Johnson, is that one that you can field?
Yeah, let me take a run at it. I mean, there's probably a couple functional reasons. Well, before we kicked off this initiative, we had called the FCC and let them know that we were going to be having this conversation and that we were going to be trying to preserve 4.9 for public safety. And they actually raised an interesting question. They said, why didn't FirstNet respond to the FCC's inquiry about whether the 4.9 spectrum would have use at FirstNet? And Sue and I were a little bewildered. I mean, we didn't remember it. We try not to miss much, but we were a little bewildered. And our best guess at the time was that either it didn't get from staff to the board, or it was a change of responsibility or something, but we missed it. But Sue asked for the actual request. Now, mind you, the FirstNet board was created in February of 2012. The board of directors were seated in August of 2012. Our first employees came months after August of 2012. The request asking this question came in June of 2012. There was nobody home. We didn't have a board, we didn't have staff, so there was no way we could have answered the first one. And nobody's fault, just is what it is. The second part of that is, right now, I can't speak to why the current FirstNet authority has not responded to it. I can tell you that those of us in the public safety community that were working on this 4.9 initiative and the positions we've taken, we did not ask FirstNet whether we should do it or what they thought of it. And you might cause you to flinch a little bit to hear that, but the rationale is simple, and Chief Dowd will back me up. Public safety, police, fire, EMTs, and the ecosystem around that, it isn't our pattern to traipse over to the federal government, find the right secretariat or bureau, ask them what we should do, and follow their advice. That isn't how we work. Public safety decides what we need to do our job. We find partners, we coalesce, we refine our strategy and message, then we come to Washington, D.C. and say, this is what public safety needs. And that's exactly what happened here. FirstNet Authority found out about this the day we were going to release it, that this was important to public safety. So my guess is the reason they haven't weighed in is they haven't had adequate time between us raising the issue and having an opportunity to comment. And I'd defer to my colleagues if they have a different opinion.
No, I agree with that, Jeff. I think, what you're saying is makes sense, right? They would have to, look, FirstNet exists for us. The FirstNet Authority exists for public safety, right? So, so the fact that they haven't commented on it, I don't think means anything one way or the other at this point. We decide, as Jeff said, what our needs are, and what we have learned over time is it's very difficult to get a hold of resources like this if you don't have them. And if you give it up, you never get it back, or it's near impossible to get it back. And we don't want to be in that situation. We don't want to be reactive again when we need something. Remember, the FCC operates by regulation, not by law. So what they give, they can take away. And we don't want to see that happen. It would be a mistake, and that's why this whole effort is where it is. One other thing unrelated to that, I just want to mention that I didn't mention earlier, and I think Sue touched on it. We touched it on our webinar this morning, which is if there is a better idea out there, if FirstNet is not the right place to protect this 4.9 spectrum, if somebody's got that idea out there, the PSSA wants to hear it. We want to hear what you think. So if there are other solutions or other potential solutions, please bring it on. We want to hear it.
Sue, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, complete agreement. I think, like I said, these efforts only are good based on input that we get, and that's why the outcome of the legislation and the fact that we have that broadband network today happened was a result of a lot of people with a lot of ideas, and they turned out kind of different than where we started, and that's okay because it's what public safety wanted. So that's the right approach.
So one of the comments that just came in is pretty much asking, it says, that's fine, but you need to listen, all caps, to us. And so what I'd like one of you to reiterate is we've got this PSAC that has got a broad representation of first responders. How do people access that? What is the best way to get that boots on the ground voice into those that are representing first responders on the PSAC?
Well, probably the best way is, you can find who's on the PSAC by just hitting the FirstNet Authority website. And you can reach out to any of the leadership or any of the members in the vertical that you feel connected to, and you can just tell them what's on your mind. Moreover, you can reach out directly to the chairman of the board for FirstNet. Try that at any other major corporation, see how that works out for you. You can reach out to the chairman at FirstNet. You can reach out to any board member you happen to be connected to. It is built to listen. And I really appreciate the comment. We do need to listen. As Chief Dowd said, listen, if you have a better idea, we'd love to hear it. Our priority is preserve this for public safety. So we're open, but you can find these folks and you can reach them and they will listen.
Fantastic. Well, we are coming to the end of our hour. So do any of you want to have some closing comments before we conclude, or are we good?
Maybe I'll just go ahead, Sue, please.
I feel just individually, since I'm the adopted member of the family, I just feel fortunate again to be working with the fine folks in public safety to do something that will actually further further their capability. What we do for them is critically important. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to be part of this.
Yeah, I think if I were going to add anything, I would say back to the question of listening. I think if you deconstructed the gene strain of public safety people, us amongst them, you would find very strong genetic roots to the fact that we don't quit. We're not trained to quit. We haven't been professionally honed and hewed to quit. We do listen. We do take better ideas, but quit is not an option when we go to work. And it's who we are. And that's one of the things I like about working with Sue and my colleagues here at the Public Safety Spectrum Alliance is just like we did with the D block, we're going to get this done for public safety, and And we need all of you to join us. And like I say, there will be an opportunity that'll be announced later this week that will create a portal for A, us to listen, and B, for you to get involved. So Martha, thank you. And Chief Dowd, it's so good to connect with you again. Sue, thank you as always.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you to all of our presenters, and we truly hope that you enjoyed our webinar today and felt that it was time well spent. We deeply appreciate your participation. Again, we're the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association, and we want to be your advocate for all aspects of broadband utilization. By being here today, you help support our efforts to continually bring you cutting-edge information about the current and future developments in your broadband access. Please visit our webpage at thepsbta.org for more information on the association, our upcoming webinars, and all recordings of our previous webinars. In appreciation for your attendance today, you will receive a free membership to our association for 2020. Also, let your friends and peers know that by attending any of our webinars, it includes a free membership to the PSBTA, which is a $75 value, as a gift from us while we are all trying to figure out how to navigate the current COVID situation. Again, if you have any additional questions, and there were some left on the table, which we will be following up with, but if you have additional questions after we log off today, please send them to info@thepsbta.org. This concludes our webinar, a look into the governance of the First Responders Network Authority, why the FirstNet Authority is built to protect 4.9 gigahertz. Thank you again for your time.